Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. The Christmas card had arrived on an ordinary Thursday morning, its plain, white envelope sitting innocuously on the doorstep, as though it were a regular piece of mail. There was nothing extravagant about it. No glitter, no shining gold lettering. Just simple, clean black text, Christmas party at our place, 6 p.m. We'll see you there. For a moment, Sarah stared at the envelope in her hands, as the chill of the winter air seeped through her jacket. A thin layer of snow covered the ground, and the world around her felt cold and detached, much like how she'd been feeling recently. She turned the card over, expecting to see some kind of handwritten note, maybe even a personal message from one of her children. But there was nothing. It was simply a generic invitation, not even signed. No love or we miss you, just an invitation. That was it. She'd been anticipating something like this, but not this cold, empty gesture. Sarah had given up everything for her children. Her house, her savings, her peace of mind, all of it had been sacrificed so that they could have a better future. She had worked tirelessly to give them the opportunity she never had. She had sold her house, something she'd poured her heart and soul into for years, just to ensure they had what they needed for college, for life. Now, it seemed like everything was slipping through her fingers. The invitation felt more like a reminder of her failures than a gesture of love. She stood there for a moment, contemplating it, her breath fogging up in front of her as her mind raced through the events that had brought her to this point. She had been so proud to give up her home, proud of the sacrifices she had made. But now, she wasn't sure what was left for her. She'd thought the Christmas party would be the one time, the one place where everything could go back to the way it was. When they were a family. When her kids were still hers. But this invitation, this hollow thing, left her questioning everything. She felt her fingers tightening around the card. Maybe she was reading too much into it. Maybe she was just being paranoid. After all, it had been weeks since she last saw them. The kids had gotten busy with their own lives, their own schedules. Maybe they'd just gotten too caught up in everything and forgot to reach out. But something in the back of her mind told her that wasn't it. Something felt wrong. She stood there in front of her house, the once familiar street now feeling like a stranger. She hadn't been back here in months. Since she'd sold the house, Sarah had been renting a small apartment, far smaller than she was used to, but it was enough. At least for now. Laughter, of family meals, the sound of her children's voices echoing through the walls, all of it faded away in an instant. The house was gone, but more than that, the home was gone. She had given it all up. For them. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden screech of tires as a car pulled into the driveway. It was a black sedan, sleek and polished, the kind of car that screamed success. She didn't recognize it. She turned, startled, as the car came to a slow stop. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped a woman Sarah didn't recognize. She was tall, with long, flowing hair and an air of confidence that immediately struck Sarah. She watched the woman approach, her eyes scanning Sarah up and down. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi," she said, her voice polite but distant. Are you here for the party?" Sarah blinked. She wasn't sure how to respond. Yes. I thought I was invited." The woman's smile faltered for a brief moment, before she quickly composed herself. "Ah," she said with a chuckle, but there was something forced about it. "You must be confused. This is a private event. A family gathering, you know. It's not really open to, well, everyone." Her words hit Sarah like a cold slap. Private event. A family gathering. She had been family for years. Why had her own children chosen to shut her out like this? "I'm sorry, I don't understand," Sarah whispered, her chest tightening with the sharp sting of confusion and disbelief. I thought I thought I was invited. The woman gave a small nod, her expression becoming apologetic but distant. I'm really sorry. It's just. We're trying to keep things intimate, you know? Sarah felt the heat rise in her face, the edges of her vision blurring. How could they do this to her? After everything she'd done for them, after everything she had given them? And now, they were turning her away at the doorstep? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her throat was dry, the words tangled in her mind, too painful to utter. Just then, she heard footsteps from behind. It was her son. Her heart lurched as he appeared at the door, his expression unreadable. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice flat, almost irritated. He didn't even look surprised to see her. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, before he shifted his gaze to the woman beside him. The woman smiled at him, nodding almost imperceptibly. She seemed to understand something Sarah didn't. "I thought I was invited," Sarah said again, but this time her voice was barely above a whisper, as though speaking louder might make everything feel even more unbearable. Her son's gaze softened for a brief moment, but it quickly hardened again. "I don't think you should be here, Mom," he said, his tone detached. You shouldn't have come." The words cut through Sarah like a knife. She felt the weight of them settle into her chest, making it hard to breathe. And before she could respond, the door slammed shut, leaving her standing on the doorstep, feeling smaller than she ever had before. Sarah stood there in the cold for what felt like hours. The world around her seemed to grow dimmer, colder. She didn't know what to do next. What had just happened? Had she been imagining things? She couldn't understand why her own children had treated her this way. The people she had given up everything for, the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally, how could they have done this? Her mind raced with 1,000 questions, but there was one that stuck with her, one that she couldn't shake. Why? Why had they turned their backs on her when she needed them the most? As Sarah turned to walk away from the house, the weight of betrayal heavy in her heart, she noticed something strange, something in the shadows. A figure, hidden just beyond the porch light, watching her from a distance. Her breath caught in her throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching her. Was it someone she knew? Or had someone else witnessed the scene unfold? Her heart pounded in her chest as she hurried away, not daring to look back. Whoever was watching her knew more than they were letting on. And she was going to find out why. Sarah walked away from the house, the night air biting at her skin, but she barely felt it. Her mind was clouded with confusion, anger, and disbelief. How could her children, her own flesh and blood, do this to her? She had given everything for them, and yet here she was, alone, standing on the edge of her past, cut off from the family she had built with so much love and sacrifice. As she shuffled down the street, the lights from the Christmas decorations seemed to mock her. Everywhere she looked, families were gathered together, laughing, sharing joy. And there she was, a ghost in the midst of their happiness, with no explanation, no closure, just an empty feeling gnawing at her heart. She didn't know where she was going. There was no plan, no destination in mind. Her legs carried her through the streets, her body on autopilot as her mind replayed the painful scene from earlier. She had been rejected, treated like a stranger in her own children's lives. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She fumbled for it, her fingers shaking as she pulled it out. It was a message from her daughter, Emily. Sarah stared at it for a moment before opening it. "Mom, I don't know why you showed up at the party. I told you it was private, and we're trying to move on without you. You made your choice, and we made ours. Please don't contact us again. Emily." The message felt like a slap to the face. Sarah could feel her chest tighten as the words sank in. Her own daughter, the one she had raised and loved, was telling her to stay away. To never contact them again. What had happened to the family they once were? Her breath came in short, shallow gasps as she continued to walk, her mind reeling. She didn't know how much longer she could go on like this, disconnected from everyone she had ever cared about. She couldn't understand why Emily, her own flesh and blood, had turned her back on her so completely. As the city lights blurred around her, Sarah found herself standing in front of a small cafe. She hadn't realized where she had been walking, but it seemed like the right place to sit and think. She pulled open the door and stepped inside. The warmth of the cafe wrapped around her like a comforting blanket, but it did little to ease the cold ache in her heart. The cafe was nearly empty, save for a few patrons sipping on coffee and chatting in low voices. Sarah walked to a corner booth and slid into the seat, pulling her coat tighter around her. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but the feelings of betrayal and confusion were overwhelming. A waitress approached her with a gentle smile, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to return it. "Can I get you something to drink?" the waitress asked. "A coffee." "Black," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As the waitress walked away, Sarah rested her head on her hand, staring out the window. The rain had started to fall, adding to the melancholy of the night. It was as though the world itself was mourning with her. She took out her phone again, scrolling through her contacts. She couldn't help herself. She dialed Emily's number, hoping that this time, things would be different. She let it ring, her heart pounding in her chest with each passing second. After several rings, it went to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Emily. I'm unavailable right now. Please leave a message." Sarah's throat tightened as she heard the robotic, impersonal tone of her daughter's voice. She hung up before leaving a message. What was there to say? "I just want my family back. Please, let me in." But those words would never be enough. She wasn't sure what would be. As Sarah sat in the booth, trying to collect her thoughts, a shadow fell over her. She looked up, startled, and found herself face to face with a man she hadn't seen in years. "Dad," she whispered. It was Richard, her ex-husband. The last person she ever expected to see, especially on a night like tonight. Richard's face was older, more worn, but still familiar. His brown hair had thinned, his eyes had lost some of their youthful spark, but his presence still commanded attention. The years between them hadn't been kind to their relationship, but they had always shared one thing, their children. "Sarah," Richard said, his voice hesitant. "I didn't expect to find you here." "Neither did I," she replied, forcing a weak smile. "What are you doing here?" "I was passing through," Richard said, sitting down across from her without waiting for an invitation. "I saw you from outside. I know things have been difficult between us, but I thought maybe we could talk." Sarah wasn't sure she was ready for this conversation, but something about his presence was comforting. They had shared so much, their lives, their children, their home. Even after the divorce, there was a strange bond that remained, a recognition that, despite everything, they were still tied together by their past. "Talk?" Sarah echoed, her voice shaky. "Talk about what?" Richard sighed and looked at her, his gaze softening. "I know things have been hard for you lately. I heard about what happened at the party. I'm sorry." Sarah felt her chest tighten again. She couldn't bring herself to talk about it with him, not now. Not yet. The rawness of the situation still hurt too much. "Don't apologize," she said quietly, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around her cup of coffee. "I just don't understand. They just shut me out. After everything. I don't know what went wrong. I gave up everything for them." "I know you did," Richard said softly. "But you're not the only one who sacrificed. We both did. I know it hasn't been easy for any of us." Sarah stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You think this is easy?" "They've thrown me away, Richard. They've shut me out like I'm some kind of stranger. After everything I did for them. Sarah, Richard interrupted gently, his voice low. You need to understand something. The kids, they've been struggling too. They're not the same people they were when we were together. Something changed after the divorce. Something I don't think either of us saw. What do you mean? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Richard leaned in, his expression serious. There's more to this than just what you think. I've been hearing things, rumors, whispers. And I think it's time you knew the truth. The cafe's quiet hum faded as Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She leaned forward, urging him to continue. Truth? What truth? She asked, her voice shaking. Richard took a deep breath, his eyes darting around the room as if checking to see if anyone was listening. He then looked at Sarah, locking eyes with her. They're not who you think they are, Richard said, his voice barely audible. And neither are you. The cafe grew quieter as Sarah and Richard sat in silence, the weight of his words hanging between them. She barely registered the soft hum of the espresso machine or the clink of ceramic cups. All she could hear was the racing of her own heartbeat, thundering in her ears, drowning out everything else. They're not who you think they are, Richard had said, and for a moment, Sarah wasn't sure if she had heard him right. She stared at him, her fingers frozen around her coffee cup, the warmth of the drink long gone. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling, though she tried to keep it steady. What's going on with them? Why are they treating me like this? Richard sighed, his face creased with weariness. The lines around his eyes deepened as he leaned in, his gaze scanning the room once more. This time more cautiously. It's not just about you, Sarah. It's about everything. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She was no longer certain if she wanted to hear what he had to say. Every word felt like a shard of glass, digging deeper into a wound she wasn't sure could ever heal. What do you mean, everything? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper now. Are you saying, they've been lying to me? About what? Why didn't you tell me sooner, Richard? I didn't know how to explain it, he replied softly. I don't know what's been happening in their lives, but I've seen signs. They've been involved in things they shouldn't be. Things I didn't want you to know about. Sarah recoiled, her chest tightening. The images of her children, their laughter, their bright eyes as they'd grown up, flashed through her mind. She couldn't reconcile that image with the one Richard was painting. Her kids weren't perfect, but they weren't criminals. They couldn't be. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice rising slightly. Are you saying they're involved in something illegal? Richard's eyes flickered with discomfort, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he glanced around once more, his voice low. I don't know all the details, but there's something off about them lately. They've changed, Sarah. And I think they've been hiding something from both of us. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. Her children, the people she had fought for, the ones she had poured everything into, were hiding things from her? Her mind scrambled to put it all together, but nothing made sense. She couldn't fathom what Richard was suggesting. She looked down at her coffee, the liquid now lukewarm. A strange thought began to form in her mind. Could it be possible that, in their pursuit of a better life, they had lost their way? Could they have become entangled in something dangerous? I don't understand, she whispered. Why would they shut me out like that if they're in trouble? Why wouldn't they come to me? Richard's gaze softened, and for the first time in the conversation, he reached across the table, placing a hand over hers. Sarah, you know how they are. They've always been proud, maybe too proud. And they've never wanted to burden you with their problems. I think they're scared. Scared of what might happen if they admit what they've done. Scared of how you'll react. Sarah pulled her hand away, the weight of his words suffocating her. Scared of how I'll react? How could they be scared of her when she had given everything for them? A strange sense of dread settled over her. The room seemed to close in around her, the shadows on the walls growing longer, darker. She had always believed in the bond between a mother and her children. But now, she wasn't so sure. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Sarah said, her voice breaking. I need to understand. I need to know. What's going on with them? I need to know the truth." Richard's eyes darkened, and he sat back, his hands folding on the table in front of him. "You're not going to like what I have to say, Sarah," he said quietly. "But I think you deserve to know." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she leaned forward, her breath shallow. "Tell me," she whispered. "Please. I need to know." Richard hesitated, then let out a long breath. "I've heard rumors. There's been talk about Emily. She's mixed up with some people who don't have good intentions. And as for Jack, I've seen him with some shady characters. People who aren't just interested in selling goods, if you know what I mean." Sarah's mind reeled. Emily? Jack? The very thought of them being involved in something illicit sent a wave of nausea through her. But it didn't make sense. They were good kids. They were always focused on their futures, always looking for ways to build something better for themselves. "Who are these people?" she demanded, her voice shaking with desperation. Richard's gaze dropped to the table, and his voice grew even softer. "I don't know their names, but I've seen them around. They're dangerous. And I think they've been manipulating your kids. Using them for something. I'm afraid it's already gone too far." For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. The air felt thick, suffocating. Her mind struggled to comprehend what Richard was saying. Her children were being used by criminals? Had she really been so blind? Tears welled in her eyes as she thought about all the sacrifices she had made for them, everything she had given up to make sure they had a chance at a better life. Was this how it was all going to end? Was this what they had done with all of her love and support? Suddenly, the door to the cafe opened, and a blast of cold air swept in. Sarah's eyes darted to the entrance, and she froze when she saw a familiar figure standing in the doorway. It was Jack. Her son. He stood in the doorway, his face pale and drawn, his eyes scanning the room. When they met Sarah's gaze, something flickered in them, something she couldn't quite place. It was as if he was seeing her for the first time in years, but his expression was unreadable. Jack took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate, as though unsure of how to approach her. He looked different, his clothes were disheveled, his hair unkempt, and there was a certain hardness in his gaze that Sarah had never seen before. "Jack?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, but he heard her. He stopped in his tracks, his jaw tightening. "Mom," he said, his voice low and distant. "What are you doing here?" I came to find you," Sarah said, her heart pounding in her chest. "Jack, what's going on? Why did you shut me out? Why are you involved in this?" Jack's eyes flickered toward Richard, who sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Jack's lips pressed into a thin line. And for a moment, there was a long silence between them. Then, Jack spoke, his voice hard, but with a trace of vulnerability Sarah hadn't heard in years. "You shouldn't be here, Mom," he said quietly. "You don't know what you're asking. You don't know what's really going on." "Then tell me," Sarah pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please, Jack, tell me the truth." Jack shook his head slowly, his eyes dark and haunted. "I can't." The room seemed to hold its breath as Jack stood there, looking at Sarah with eyes that were too hard, too distant. The warmth of the cafe, the soft murmur of conversation from the few remaining customers, all felt like a distant echo as the weight of his words pressed in on Sarah. "You don't know what you're asking." Her son had just said that, but the tone in his voice, the hardness that edged his every word, made it clear that something was very wrong. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her, the very foundation of the family she had tried so hard to protect, cracking open. She was no longer sure if the person standing in front of her was the same boy she had raised, the child who used to run into her arms after school, the one who had clung to her for comfort when he was scared. Who is this person now? Jack, Sarah said softly, her voice breaking. Please, I need to understand. Why won't you tell me? What's going on? Why are you hiding things from me? Jack's eyes flickered momentarily, a glimmer of something, regret, perhaps, or guilt, passing across his features. But it was gone so quickly, replaced by the mask he had been wearing for months now. A mask that Sarah didn't recognize. You wouldn't understand, Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper, as though he was trying to keep the conversation private, even in the middle of a bustling cafe. I need to understand, Sarah insisted, her hands shaking as she reached out to him, her fingers curling slightly. Please, Jack. Please don't shut me out. I've given you everything. I've sacrificed so much. Why are you doing this to me? Jack turned his head, his eyes focusing on the floor as though the weight of her words was too much for him to bear. He took a step back, moving away from her outstretched hand, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might leave without saying another word. But he didn't. Instead, he looked up, his eyes hollow, tired. It's not that simple, Mom. I can't just explain it to you. I've gotten myself in deep. In a way that I can't get out of easily. What do you mean, Jack? What have you gotten yourself into? Sarah asked, her heart pounding in her chest. You don't have to do this alone. I'm your mother. I'm always here for you, no matter what. But Jack shook his head slowly, his lips curling into a bitter smile. You don't get it, Mom. You've always been there for me. But this isn't something I can ask you to help me with. The words hit Sarah like a slap to the face. This isn't something I can ask you to help me with. The words hit Sarah like a slap to the face. This isn't something I can ask you to help me with. Her own son was telling her that he didn't want her help. That he didn't trust her enough to share whatever dark path he had been walking down. It was as though the ground had been ripped out from under her, and she was left standing in an abyss, unable to find her way back to the shore. Jack, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. You're scaring me. You're not the same. Please, just tell me what's going on. I don't care what it is. I just want to help you. Jack's eyes softened for the briefest of moments, but before Sarah could say anything more, he cut her off. You can't help me, Mom. You can't fix this, he said, his voice now tinged with desperation. I've made deals. I've made promises to people I shouldn't have. People who will make sure I can't get out of this. And if I try to back out now, it'll be worse for everyone. Sarah's head spun, the words not fully sinking in. Deals? What kind of deals, Jack? What promises? Who are these people? I don't understand. Tell me. Jack hesitated, glancing around the cafe nervously. I can't tell you everything. It's too dangerous. You don't know what these people are capable of. Sarah felt a surge of panic rise in her chest. Jack, you're my son. You don't have to protect me from the truth. I can handle it. Whatever it is, we can face it together. For a long moment, Jack said nothing, his gaze locked onto the floor as though he couldn't bear to meet her eyes. Then, in a quiet voice, he spoke again, barely above a whisper. They're dangerous people, Mom. People who do things that are illegal. And I'm involved in it. I don't want to be, but I don't have a choice anymore. Sarah's heart dropped. The words were like knives, each one cutting deeper into her chest. Illegal? What was he talking about? Her mind reeled as she tried to make sense of it. Was Jack really involved in something criminal? Had he become entangled in a web so thick that he couldn't escape? How did this happen, Jack? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. How did you get involved with them? Jack shook his head. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I needed money. I thought I could get by without anyone finding out. But then they came to me. And now I can't get out. Sarah stared at him, her heart breaking. She had worked so hard to give him a good life, to make sure he had everything he needed to succeed. And now, she was learning that he had gone down a path that she couldn't follow him on. She had no idea how to fix this. Who are they, Jack? Sarah asked again, her voice trembling. Who are these people you're involved with? Jack's gaze flickered nervously, and for a moment, he seemed like a frightened child again. I can't say. You won't understand. You wouldn't be able to help me. Sarah's frustration boiled over. I'm your mother, Jack. I will understand. You can't shut me out like this. But Jack just stood there, his eyes distant and cold. I'm sorry, Mom. But I have to go. He turned and walked away from the table, leaving Sarah sitting there, utterly alone in a sea of confusion and pain. Her heart shattered as she watched him leave, a part of her soul dying with each step he took away from her. Sarah sat in the cafe for what felt like hours, her mind spinning with 1,000 questions. What had happened to her son? How had he gotten involved with people like this? Why had he kept it all hidden from her? She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. She had always thought that no matter what, she would be able to protect her children. But now, it seemed like she was powerless to help them. Jack had made his choices, and there was nothing she could do to undo the damage that had already been done. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime from her phone. She picked it up, her heart leaping into her throat when she saw the message. It was from Emily. Mom, I know you're upset. But I think it's time you knew the truth. You deserve to know everything. Meet me at the park tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll tell you everything. Don't tell Dad. The message was short, cryptic, but it sent a chill through Sarah's veins. Emily knew something. Something that she wasn't telling Sarah. The next day was gray, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain, yet somehow held back the storm. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in front of her apartment, staring out at the empty street. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something she couldn't control. Emily's message from the night before had gnawed at her, a constant reminder that her daughter knew more than she had ever let on. Meet me at the park tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll tell you everything. Don't tell Dad. The words echoed in Sarah's mind as she bundled herself in her coat and stepped out into the cold air. Her mind was a whirlwind, racing with all the possibilities, none of them good. What could Emily possibly have to say? What truths was she hiding from her? The park was a short walk from Sarah's apartment, but it felt like an eternity as she made her way there. Her thoughts were consumed by Jack's cryptic words, his admission that he was involved in something dangerous, something that went far beyond her comprehension. She couldn't stop replaying the conversation in her head, the way he had tried to protect her, to keep her from knowing the truth. But the truth was already out there, whether she was ready to face it or not. When she reached the park, she saw Emily standing at the edge of the playground, her hands buried deep in the pockets of her jacket. She looked as though she had been waiting for a long time, her posture stiff and her gaze distant. The girl who once ran to Sarah with open arms, eager for affection, now seemed like a stranger. Sarah took a deep breath before walking toward her, trying to calm the frantic beating of her heart. She needed answers. She needed to know what was going on with her children. She needed to understand why everything was falling apart. Emily, Sarah called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily turned at the sound of her mother's voice, her expression unreadable. She looked at Sarah for a long moment, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness, anger, and something else Sarah couldn't quite place. "Mom," Emily said, her voice cold and distant. "I didn't think you'd actually come." Sarah felt a pang of hurt at the words, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to be emotional right now. She needed to stay strong. "I came because I need to understand, Emily," Sarah said, her voice firm but trembling. "I need to know what's happening. What's going on with you and Jack? Why are you two shutting me out? Why are you involved with these people?" Emily looked away for a moment, her jaw tightening. She seemed to be searching for the right words, but nothing seemed to come. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "It's not what you think, Mom. It's complicated," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "You wouldn't understand. It's not safe for you to know. Not safe for me to know." Sarah's heart sank. "What do you mean by that?" "I'm your mother, Emily. I'm the one who raised you. Why are you acting like you can't trust me?" Emily's eyes hardened, and for the first time in the conversation, Sarah saw a flicker of anger. "Because you wouldn't understand, Mom. You've always been so perfect. You always had everything under control, and you never had to deal with anything that wasn't safe. But I've been living in a world where nothing is certain. Where every choice I make could be my last. Emily." "No, listen to me." Emily interrupted, her voice rising. "I didn't choose this. None of us chose this. But we were forced into it. It's not just about us anymore. It's about survival. You don't know what it's like to be out there, to have to make decisions that could change everything, to have to live with the consequences of those choices." Sarah took a step back, her heart aching. "You're involved with dangerous people, aren't you?" Emily's eyes flashed with something close to fear, but she quickly masked it with indifference. "I'm not involved with them like you think I am. We just have to do what we can to survive. And sometimes, that means making deals with people you shouldn't trust. People who have their own agenda." "Tell me who they are, Emily," Sarah said, her voice urgent. "Who are these people? What have you gotten yourselves involved in? Why didn't you come to me? I could have helped you. You didn't have to go down this road alone." Emily's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "I didn't want to burden you, Mom. I thought you'd be disappointed in me. And I didn't want you to get hurt." "You don't get it, Emily," Sarah said, her voice rising in frustration. "You are burdening me. By keeping me in the dark, by shutting me out, you're making it worse for everyone. I'm your mother. I should have been the one to help you, not these people. But you're shutting me out, just like Jack did." Emily's face twisted with a mix of guilt and anger. "I never wanted to hurt you, Mom. But I'm not a child anymore. I can't just come running to you every time something goes wrong. I have to make my own decisions. And this was one of those decisions." The word stung. Sarah's chest tightened as she realized that the daughter she had once known, the girl who had clung to her in times of fear and uncertainty, was no longer there. Emily had grown into someone else. Someone who was hiding behind a wall of anger and self-reliance, unwilling to share the truth with the person who loved her most. "So this is it, then?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "You and Jack, you're just going to keep me in the dark. You're going to keep living like this, making choices that you can't undo, and I'm supposed to just sit here and watch?" Emily took a deep breath, her eyes looking distant once again. "You don't know what it's like, Mom. You don't understand what we're up against." "I understand more than you think," Sarah said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I understand that you're my children. And I love you. I've always loved you. But I can't stand by and watch you destroy your lives. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not." There was a long silence between them, the tension so thick that it felt suffocating. Emily finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mom. I never wanted to hurt you. But I don't think there's anything you can do now. We've made our choices, and there's no going back." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as the weight of Emily's words sank in. No going back. It was the truth, but it was a truth she wasn't ready to accept. Suddenly, Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted immediately. Her eyes widened in panic. "I have to go," Emily said, her voice urgent. "I'll explain later, okay? But for now, I need to leave. I'll be in touch." Before Sarah could respond, Emily turned and quickly walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Sarah stood there in the park, the cold wind whipping through her hair, her heart heavy with sorrow. Her daughter had just walked away from her again. And this time, it felt like there was no coming back. Sarah spent the rest of the day in a haze, her mind swirling with everything Emily had said. She couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the overwhelming sense that she was losing her children to a world that she couldn't understand. Jack's silence, Emily's cryptic message, and the sudden rush of fear and urgency in her daughter's voice had left her reeling. That night, Sarah sat in her small apartment, staring out the window at the dim city lights. She had always believed that family was everything, that no matter how far they strayed, she could pull them back. But now, she wasn't so sure. Her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "Meet me tomorrow. Midnight. At the old warehouse on Elm Street. You'll find the answers you're looking for." The message sent a chill down her spine. Who was this? What did they know? The night was darker than usual as Sarah stepped out into the cool air, the message from the unknown number weighing heavily in her pocket. "Meet me tomorrow. Midnight. At the old warehouse on Elm Street. You'll find the answers you're looking for." The word seemed more like a warning than an invitation. A chill ran down her spine as she looked at the clock, 10:45 p.m. She had an hour and 15 minutes to prepare, though she wasn't sure what she was preparing for. She wasn't entirely sure who had sent the message or what kind of answers she would find at the old warehouse on Elm Street. But one thing was certain, it had something to do with her children, and it was the final clue she needed to understand the dangerous web they were caught in. Her mind raced as she grabbed her coat and keys, the sound of her heart pounding in her ears. Elm Street was on the edge of town, a place she had avoided for years. The warehouses had been abandoned for as long as she could remember, left to rot and decay, much like the old neighborhood that once thrived there. It was the perfect place for secrets to be hidden. And from the moment she had received that cryptic message, she had known it was the last piece of the puzzle. She didn't bother calling anyone. She knew she couldn't involve Richard, he wouldn't understand. And Emily had made it clear that she wanted nothing to do with her. Sarah felt like she was walking into a world she didn't belong in, a place filled with danger and hidden truths, but she was determined to find answers. She had to know why her children had been keeping secrets from her, why they had been involved with dangerous people, and most importantly, why they had pushed her away. The streets were eerily quiet as she drove toward the outskirts of town, the cold wind whispering through the trees. Her car seemed to be the only one on the road, the headlights casting long shadows along the empty streets. As she neared the old warehouse district, the familiar sense of unease began to settle in her chest. Elm Street was exactly as she remembered it, dark, abandoned, and silent. The warehouses loomed like forgotten giants, their windows boarded up, their metal doors rusted with age. There was a sense of desolation here, a place where memories had faded, and time had stood still. Sarah pulled her car into a small, empty lot just outside the warehouse, her fingers trembling as she shut off the engine. The silence was deafening as she stepped out of the car, the wind biting at her skin. She wrapped her coat tighter around her body, glancing around the deserted area. The warehouse in front of her was large, its dark silhouette standing like a sentinel in the night. There were no lights, no signs of life, just the cold, empty space surrounding it. She could barely make out the shape of the building through the darkness, but she knew she had to go inside. It was the only way to get to the truth. Taking a deep breath, Sarah walked toward the warehouse, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the stillness. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she reached the metal door. The rusty padlock was old and worn, but it didn't take much effort to pull it off. It fell to the ground with a loud clang, and the door creaked open, revealing the darkness inside. The air inside the warehouse was thick with dust and the smell of mildew, the remnants of a place long forgotten. Sarah's heart raced as she stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light that filtered in through cracks in the walls. She could hear the sound of her breathing, the rapid thumping of her heart in her ears. And then she heard something else. A sound. A movement. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. There was someone else here. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but then, out of the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It was a man, tall and imposing, his face obscured by the darkness. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she took a step back. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice firmer now, though her body trembled with fear. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a few slow steps toward her, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm the one who knows the truth," he said. "The truth about your children." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as his words sank in. "The truth about my children?" "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you know about them? Why are you here?" The man stepped closer, his face coming into the light. His features were sharp, his expression unreadable. He was older than Sarah had imagined, but there was something familiar about him, something she couldn't place. "I know everything, Sarah," he said, his voice cold. "About your son, about your daughter. I know what they've gotten themselves into, and I know why they've been keeping secrets from you." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" she demanded again. "What do you want from me?" The man's lips curled into a thin smile. "I'm someone who's been watching your children. And now, I'm here to show you what they've been hiding." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the far corner of the warehouse. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her mind racing with questions. She didn't know whether to trust this man, whether he was telling the truth or if this was all just some twisted game. But she had no choice. She had come this far. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, following him into the darkness. The air grew colder as they moved deeper into the warehouse, the silence oppressive. The man stopped in front of a large crate, and with a flick of his wrist, he moved it aside, revealing a door hidden in the floor. "This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is where the answers lie." Sarah's heart pounded as she looked down at the door. It was small, nondescript, and it looked like it hadn't been opened in years. The man knelt down and unlocked it, pulling it open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into the unknown. "This is where they've been hiding," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "This is where your children's choices have led them. And if you want the truth, you'll have to follow me." Without waiting for a response, the man descended into the darkness. Sarah stood at the top of the stairs, her mind spinning with fear and uncertainty. This was it. This was the moment she had been dreading. But she had come too far to turn back now. She took a deep breath and followed him down the stairs. The staircase was narrow and winding, and as Sarah descended into the darkness, the air grew colder, the scent of mold and decay thickening with each step. The light from her phone cast long shadows against the walls, and she could hear the faint sound of footsteps ahead of her. Finally, they reached the bottom, and the man led her into a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with boxes and crates, and the room smelled of dust and stale air. In the center of the room was a table, and on it, a collection of items that made Sarah's stomach turn. There were photographs, stacks of money, and a series of documents she couldn't quite make out. And then, in the center of it all, was a large, ornate box. The man stepped forward, his hand reaching for the box. "This is what they've been hiding from you," he said, his voice cold and final. "This is the truth about your children." With a slow, deliberate motion, he opened the box, revealing its contents. Inside was a pile of documents, photographs, and a small, intricately carved piece of wood. Sarah's eyes widened as she looked at the photographs, images of Emily and Jack with men she didn't recognize, their faces hard and cold. The documents were filled with details she couldn't comprehend, names, dates, and places that made no sense. And then she saw it, the piece of wood, intricately carved, with symbols she couldn't understand. "What is this?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man looked at her with a grim expression. "This is what your children have gotten involved in. The people they've been working with. The deals they've made. This is the price of their survival." Sarah's heart sank as the truth began to unfold before her eyes. She had always believed that her children were innocent, that they had made mistakes, but this was something far worse than she had imagined. This final part reveals the ultimate truth about Sarah's children, their involvement with dangerous people, and the dark secrets they've been hiding. Sarah is faced with the painful reality of her children's choices, and while she learns the truth, the emotional weight of it is overwhelming. The lesson in this final part is about accepting the reality of what has been hidden, the deep pain of knowing that the ones she loved most had been living in a world she didn't even recognize. The story ends on a somber note, with Sarah left to process the truth and what it means for her and her family's future.